Welcome to the 12-3 Preparing Payroll Records lecture. This is all going to be PowerPoint for me, and I'll tell you what notes I would add to it. You have a couple of these printouts already, so I would just take notes on those if I were you. So a payroll register is something that summarizes the earnings, the deductions, and the net pay of all employees for one pay period. So payroll register includes every single employee, and it's just for a specific pay period, such as weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly. And it's going to show us the earnings and the deductions. And we already said that a payroll is for all employees, so the payroll register logically has all employees on it. So, a couple things on this that we want to talk about and make clear. So the first thing that's going to pop up here is the pay period date. So this is the date that it ends on, whereas this is the payment date. And even though in MindTap these are the same, that is not necessarily always the case out in the real world, because they may take a day or two before they actually make the payment after the period ends. So read directions closely on that. Then the third thing that we have is all the employee personal data, and that stuff all comes from their W-4. So I would note that if it were me on this, that you can get all that information, marital status, number of allowances, from the W-4, which we talked about in the previous section, that you fill out on the first day you start a job, and then do it again if anything changes on those marital status or number of allowance items. The fourth thing is the total earnings. And again, that was section 12-1 where we did regular and overtime earnings. This is kind of the crucial number. It comes from the time card. So I would note that this is coming from the calculations with the time card. The fifth thing is federal income tax. We talked about all of these deductions in the previous section, 12-2. So federal income tax, if it were me, I would just put a thing out here that says this comes from the tax table, and it utilizes those four things we talked about when we're calculating it in the last section, which is I need to know total earnings, I need to know the pay period, I need to know the marital status, and I need to know the number of allowances to use that tax table. So FIT tax table. The next one is Social Security tax. And what I would note on this handout on your slide is that for Social Security tax, it is total earnings times 6.2%. And I would make sure I summarized it on here. This is a great document to just summarize nearly everything we did in this chapter. Then Medicare tax. I would write on that it is total earnings times 1.45%. So I'm taking that total earnings number here times 1.45% there, total earnings times 0.062 for the Social Security. Health insurance, retirement plan. These I would just note that they are at the employee's direction, and your directions in MindTap will always tell you what those are. And then we total this, all the deductions, so FIT, Social Security, Medicare, health insurance, retirement plan to get to the total deductions. And then that calculation that I said was nearly as important as the accounting equation is we need to know that total earnings of $1,466.25 minus total deductions of $291.17 equals my net pay of $1,175.08. And I do this for every single employee, and then I'm going to add every single column down. And just to check myself, once I've added it all, I ought to take the total earnings minus the total deductions to make sure I still get net pay. So again, add every single column up and down to get a total, and then check across to make sure you didn't screw anything up. And also in MindTap, if it is a dash here, you should leave it blank unless it tells you otherwise. Don't put a 0 in, leave it blank. The final thing that is on here is a check number, and I want to kind of allude to this because of next section 12-4. We would, as a business, have a general checking account with a lot of money in it, hopefully. Most businesses set up a checking account that's for payroll only, so they will move the amount of this net pay, 626987, to the payroll account. So they'll write a check out of the general checking account and move that amount of money over into a payroll account. And then they will write these individual checks to people out of the payroll account. So in my notes right here, I would circle all those check numbers and say that those are checks from the payroll account. So the next thing then that we are going to talk about is the employee earnings record. This is a business form used to record details of an employee's earnings and deductions. So as the name says, employee earnings record, it's all their earnings as well as their deductions, a record of those. And what one looks like is on this page. So you guys have this handout once again so you can take notes on this. Probably at the top what I would write is that a business is required to send the IRS and other government agencies quarterly and annual reports showing the employees' taxable earnings and taxes withheld from their earnings. So stated another way, business required to send the government quarterly and annually employee earnings and tax withholding. That's going to be part of quizzes and tests for sure. The form that they use to do this is called an earnings record, and it's right here. So this payroll register we had done on the last slide, now we're on the earnings record. So let's show that. So the last day of the quarter, again, there are 3 months in a quarter, so the quarters end on March 31st, June 30th, September 30th, and December 31st, if you want to write that down. Again, March 31st, April 30th, sorry, not April 30th, June 30th, September 30th, or December 31st. That's your choice for the end of the quarter. So whatever pay period we're in, we put it in the appropriate quarter. Then we get all the employee personal data again from their files, from W-4s and other things in HR. So their employee number, their name, what their rate is per hour, their social security, marital status, etc., withholding allowances and position. Then we have this beginning accumulated earnings number, and this is from the previous quarter, what their total gross earnings are. Okay, and I would write that out to the side. It is gross earnings, it is not net earnings. Then we are doing the December 15th pay. So we had done all these first 4 lines in previous pay periods. We're now on December 15th. So we would literally end up copying all of that information from the payroll register for John Butler down to this line. So we copy that line. Then the next thing that we do, the 6th thing, is we update accumulated earnings. And again, to do that, I'd write this out maybe to the side so you see. I take the $27,195 here on line 4, and I add my total earnings of $1,466.25 to get to 28,661.25. So do not use this net pay number right next to it. Use total earnings. It's accumulated earnings, not accumulated pay. So I go to earnings total to do that. And then I would do the same thing on the next pay period on December 31st for John and update it. And then I would total improve this. Most of the problems that you do in MindTap, you're not going to be doing an entire quarter, so it is not very often that you're going to have to add this. It's at the end of the quarter that you would total improve this thing. Okay, so that is all of section 12.3. So in 12.1 we learned all about earnings and pay periods and pay types. And then in section 2 we learned about how to do all the deductions, compute FIT and Social Security, Medicare, and all the voluntary ones. And then this section really was just trying to show you how to summarize all of that information for every employee in a payroll register, as well as do the earnings record so we could file things with the government.